everyone, and welcome to tonight's session. Thank you so much for coming along. Let me introduce myself. I'm Barbara Jenkins. I'm a Sustainability Education Officer for Willoughby City Council. And tonight's session is being run in partnership with 4 other councils. We've got Ku-ring-gai, Lane Cove, Mosman and North Sydney councils all involved as well. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that wherever we are today, we are all on the lands of Aboriginal traditional owners. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, both past, present and emerging, and thank them for sharing with us their immense knowledge on how to care for this country. So tonight's session is the 4th in our Introduction to Sustainable Building series, which are being presented by experts from Renew. And tonight we'll discuss how important it is to find the right team for your sustainable build or renovations and how to get started and select the right people to work with. You'll also be able to get all of your questions answered. In the last 3 webinars, we discussed how to design your house for resilience, how to select and source sustainable building materials, and how to integrate a sustainable water management system. So if you missed any of those, I'll be sending the links to all 3 recordings in my follow-up email anyway, to be able to watch them in your own time. As councils, we're running these webinars to assist our communities to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, as well as reduce their energy and water usage. We know that as residents, we all have a direct impact on the planet through our home, and improving our built environment has a significant impact on how we can achieve sustainable living and reduce the resources we use, but without compromising our comfort. So the expert tonight that we'll be presenting is Petra Hammond. Petra founded Meliora Studio, and she's part of the Build Her Collective. She's a seasoned developer and renovator with 10 projects under her belt, and she's currently working on an urban cottage in Alphington, redesigning a woodlands beach shack in Ocean Grove in Victoria, and 2 joint venture project developments. That sounds very dreamy. She has a passion for finding creative solutions to construction challenges and promoting environmentally sustainable design. Petra also holds a certificate in building and constructions, and she's currently studying a degree in architecture. And I look forward to hearing everything she's got to share with us.
Barbara, that was a lovely introduction. Thank you. Yes, just to follow on from that, my name's Petra, and I have been a mentor at an organisation called the Build Her Collective for quite a while now. I joined in 2018. And that's an organisation where we help women build, and we are passionate about finding sustainable approaches during the building and construction life. Of course, sustainability is massively important. It always has been to us, and I think we've been really pleased to see in recent years how it has come on to the agenda for many people, not just because standards have had to increase, but actually because people want to see that increasing as well. So today we'll be talking about how to find a sustainable team. We'll go over a lot of the actual building process and talk about how that relates to sustainability, and how you can build that team for finding a sustainable approach. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is why we're doing this. 1 second. Okay. So why are we finding a sustainable team? Okay. And the real answer is you're not meant to do everything on a build. You're actually there to build a team. Okay. So you're not meant to know how this whole project is going to run. You're going to rely on expertise from everyone else. But your job is to steer that ship and take a vision that you have for a build and create that using a team of people around you. It sounds easy sometimes, but it can be quite tricky, which is why we'll go through it today. So when you're going to kind of create your team, you've really got to look at what are going to be your drivers for your project. And I think these drivers fall into 2 categories. They kind of fall into the kind of logistics and also the values. Okay, so we'll go over values in a bit, but just to talk about the kind of more logistical drivers around money, time, and life cycle. So you've really got to kind of look at those and think, okay, so what timelines are for the project, what money are for the project, and how long do I need this to be? What kind of quality do I want to this build? So we always recommend that you do this very much at the start of the project, and you look at what are going to be your key drivers that will deliver you a successful outcome. And it is worthwhile just spending an hour or so when you first start looking at those and what's going to be, and ranking those to see what's important. However, over the last couple of years, we've also realized that there is more than just kind of money, time, and quality. There's actually other values which you can put into a project, and you should try and put those in at the start so that your values become a more holistic set of parameters from the outset of a project, which you can then drive into the project. And it is a really valuable exercise to like write those down. And they might be things like, I want to, everyone's is going to be different, and there's no right or wrong answer to that. Okay, but it might be things like, I want to have, I might want to have a passive house at one end. It might be, I want to use financially sustainable financial products for the build. It might be all these different things, but it is very important that you write those down, because when you go to create your team from then on, you can keep referring back to those values and drivers, which are the key kind of cornerstones of your project. Oh, okay. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about the actual building process, and I'll walk you through kind of what a building process looks like. The reason to do this is if you understand the process, you understand the game. Even with understanding kind of the sustainable aspects of it, you need to understand how your build is going to go first, and then where it is important to make sure your sustainable building is coming through in that process. Does that make sense? So the difficulty with building is there's many ways to do it, and there's many ways to deliver a product, which will be the building. Okay. So once you've got your values to what you want to do, you've also got to sit down and look and say, actually, what are my, what do I want my building to look like? What are the actual needs of my family? So how will I function in the space? What will that look like? From there, you then can go and think, oh, well, how am I actually going to deliver on this? Okay, now there's many ways to do it. You can start by doing, so some projects are fairly small. You could do a cosmetic renovation to a space. Unlikely in this scenario. I think we're aiming a bit kind of bigger and more kind of a major change, but you could do a cosmetic if that's going to fit your needs. You can also do major alterations to a existing structure. Okay, you can then also do kind of an extension to that, or you could just flatten the house and you can do a new build. There's no right or wrong answer. The only right or wrong answer is it going to fit the needs of what you need in that space for the period of time that you're going to need it. And we work a lot to try and figure out with people, what actually do you need to do in a different, the way you think you need to do it. And just because your kind of sister or parents did it in one way doesn't mean that's the way for you. So look at it and look. Now, they're all, whether you do a renovation, an alteration, or a new build, they're all tricky in their own ways. Sometimes you think like, oh, renovation will be easier. Not necessarily easier than a new build. Sometimes it's just easier to kind of contract out the whole thing to a new build. But even once you've kind of got the basics of what the structure is going to look like, there's different ways to do that as well, which makes it complex. And often people rely on what they've kind of heard from other people, which is a great way of going about it, but it's good if you can kind of get informed with the different ways that you could achieve a product. And so you can create your own building to the way that you want it. So how to create your own house. There is different methods. So you've got your owner builder. You can do an owner builder. Some states are a bit tricky with this. In Victoria, and I believe in New South Wales, you can do an owner builder. Part of that is if you were doing alteration, you could kind of assemble your own team and get more of a team together. You could actually go and do a design and build, which would be where you go to a builder. So your first port of call would more than likely be a design and construct company. And you would work with them solely to produce a design for you, and then they will build it for you. Or you can go to a more kind of bespoke service, and you can go to an architect, and they will design a specific product for you. They often work in a more formal tender arrangement, where they then, once the design process is finished, they will tender out to a number of builders who will come back, and then they will manage that tender process for you. Sometimes architects will also manage the construction documentation for you as well, the contract management side. It depends on whether you want it. But all of these have their own factors, and they will all have kind of different costs associated with them. Often architect and tender is the most expensive way to go about it. If you're doing a design and build, sometimes that can be kind of a volume build, which can be kind of the cheaper way to achieve a product. Sometimes it can be a bit more custom, but I think it would be a bit more cost effective than going to an architect. And often, not always, but often an owner builder is a more cost effective way of going about building or altering a home. And so that's why it's important to get your values at the start. If your value is, I want the most luxurious, like absolutely something that totally meets our needs, then I probably would say an architect and tender is for you. If you are happy to maybe, if you want a very bespoke product, but you really want it at quite a cost-effective price, then maybe own a builder or a design and build where you go to a custom builder might be a better option. So it's really about knowing the values, knowing the methods which you can achieve it, and seeing which is what right for you. So the building blueprint, and we have a nice kind of snakes and ladders kind of checkerboard here where we go from the beginning. So you've decided to build to the end where you move in. And look, every building pathway is different. And I've probably seen, well, I've seen many, hundreds of people who have gone on the building journey. In fact, maybe even thousands of people who've gone on the building journey. And I can tell you that every single one works differently, not just because they've got a different product, because they're doing it a different area. There's different codes to meet. There's different, everything's different. But if you know a blueprint and you know the order roughly in what it can be done, then it does, fingers crossed, go a bit more smoothly. Okay. And also, if you kind of know which steps have to happen logically, then you can actually save a bit of money, which I'll explain. And also, as part of this, I will explain where I would put sustainability kind of in this picture so that you're building it into the building. Okay. Because you can't add sustainable items, well, you can do, but you should really be looking to get sustainable items into your home at the start of the process rather than the end, because you can retrofit, but there's no point paying twice. Also, it can, if you have to retrofit, it can be more expensive. So again, I sound like a broken record, but look at your values and your holistic kind of drivers at the start of the process. so that when you're kind of going through this phase, which we'll talk through, you know that that's important to you, and you're adding them in at the start. Easier to add them in at the start. Okay, so we're going to start. We've decided to build. Something's kind of triggered that. I don't know whether it's been the fact that we need an extra bedroom, or like we just have to change our house. I don't know, but you've decided to build. The big picture, and this is what I've been thinking about. So you need to start thinking about what your needs are now, but also what they might be over the next X years. How long do you plan to live there? What's your family going to look like during that period? You can get a bit too hung up on this. Some people can get a bit look, you can't plan for every occasion, but broadly speaking, what is going to be your needs out of a house in the next 5, 10, maybe 15 years? And it's good to write those down, actually physically write them so you know them. You're then going to start to think about funds. So how much money, and this is very broad strokes at the start. So you are thinking, how much money do I have for this process? It's good to have that in mind, because the next step is you're going to go to a designer. And I always say, be very clear with a designer, whatever that designer is, whether it's a building designer, whether it's an interior designer, or whether it's an architect, even if you're just doing a landscape gardener, be very clear with them your budget, very much from the start. And don't be shy. I think some people go into those conversations thinking, like, I don't want to seem like I don't have enough money for this process. To be honest, that would be a big red flag for me. Go in very bluntly and say, this is the budget that I have for this process. If they don't think they can meet your budget, that's actually good feedback. Try somebody else. If you're constantly getting the same feedback on the fact that you want too much for your money, that's fine. You might have to readjust your expectations for the build process. However, it's really important to get this at this stage, rather than you've got to lock up stage in the build and you realize you've got not enough money to finish it off. Okay, so you're going to take that to design. You're going to be clear about the money. But also here, it is really good to be clear about your values. And if energy efficiency is one of those, you need to speak to them, to your designer about that, because it will have to be done at the design phase. So be clear, take all your values to your designer, potentially some inspiration as well as to what you are wanting. Some people, I'm a bit of a control freak over the design phase, but some people like to just leave the design to the designer. However, I think the more input you give them, the more the product is going to be tailored to you. Once you've got your design, you'll then go and get your finances for that build. So you're going to you're going to actually see, can we afford to do that? Okay. From there, you're going to go to permits. Permits look different for every kind of build. Check with your council, with your planning authority, as to what overlays are on your product, on your piece of land. And you should do that before you go to a designer. But you will have to get permits. So some will require DA approval. Some you can do without that. And just go straight to a building permit. Slight depends on what you're doing. So usually you get a planning permit first, and then you get the permit to actually build it afterwards. So planning first, then building. The process there would be tendering out to builders. Sometimes you need to do a more formal tender where you actually submit a document to several builders, and they'll come back to you with a price. That's a very good, fair way to do it. Some builders do not like tendering. It's a very long-winded process. It's a very formal process. but it's a good way of really getting an accurate picture. Sometimes you will have just gone to one like design and construct company, so you're not getting a broad number of people come back to you with an amount, but you just get that one amount back. But then you make the decision as to who you're going to go with to actually build your house. And that's, again, an important part of sustainability. I think you should probably find a builder that matches your values on that. As well, I said previously you should get a designer, but also the builder it's going to be easier to work with a builder who's natural towards these things rather than somebody who's fighting against you. From there, you get onto building. It's the exciting time. So you pay your deposit and you do preparation of the site. So if you're doing a new build, you might have to do either demolition of an existing structure, or if you've just bought a patch of land, you still might have to do a site cut and put the kind of services into the site. As I said, there's demolition. Then you go on to the base stage of the building work. So the base stage is where you get out of the ground. And it's one of my things that I say, once you're out of the ground, your building's mainly done. It's actually hardest to get out of the ground sometime. But that means you have to get out of the ground, you have to do, of course, either your slab or your footings, but you also have to do all of the underground work around, like potentially plumbing, irrigation, that kind of stuff. There's also some electrical work which needs to happen underground. So when they've got the base down, the builders will come in and they'll build the frame first of all, and that's where you see lots of frames going up. They'll then put the cladding on the outside of that frame, and they'll put the windows in, and that's when you get to lock-up stage. Lock-up is effectively when the building is secure. You can actually kind of physically close the doors. There's nothing inside it. It's a shell, but you can lock it up. I just have to move this. Oh, yeah. And then you go to fixing stage. Fixing stage is where internally you do all the fixing. Okay, so you put sheets of plaster on the wall. You'll put all of the you put the kitchen, all the things you'll start to see. It's actually where the building starts to come alive and you actually feel the structure and the spaces for the first time. You'll then go to practical completion. Practical completion is where the builder says, I'm done. Okay, and theoretically you could move in at that stage. But often building works aren't finished at that stage. They go to a defects period afterwards, where you're kind of just nutting out things which haven't quite worked in the way you expected them to. If there's any defects in the property, we always say keep a record. So actually write this down, not physically, you can do it on the computer, but keep a note on an Excel spreadsheet of all the defects, report them, and then follow up. Defects sometimes can be quite easy. Some builders work easily with it. Some can be quite tricky to follow up with. So it's important that you have a record, keep pushing. So that's the general process, and it looks like a smooth flow. We'll see in a second that sometimes isn't the case. But just to say, it really is key to get the sustainable stuff in at the start. Okay. So what we find is that sometimes, whilst we endeavour to go forward in that nice fluid motion, it just sometimes doesn't happen. And sometimes you're going back and forward. So it turns into this bit of a cycle instead of moving forward. And the reason for that is because you're working with various people and you're trying to achieve an outcome. But to achieve that outcome, sometimes you need to go back a step to consult somebody else before you go forward. So we'll just work through this just to give an example. So you're here, you go to a design phase, okay? And you've designed a beautiful, sustainable building with your designer. And then you go and review it against budget and you think it works, but then you take it to a builder and they're like, no, sorry, can't build that in the budget you want. The tenders are coming out way more than you expected. So then you have to go probably back to the design phase and say, look, no, this is too much for us. And then you go back to the design phase, they rework the drawings, then you re-tender them out, and fingers crossed that comes in more in budget. Then you go through that process, then you kind of get some more firm quotes about individual items. Some of those items are coming out really expensive, and this has happened quite a lot recently, where you have supplies of product, but the supplies of product, well, I had several products on my last build that I couldn't get hold of. I'd planned for them. There was this kind of cladding that I'd planned, but it just wasn't available. So you have to go back to the design phase to change it and then get back. So sometimes it is a bit of a back and forward, and that can be a bit disheartening at times. I wouldn't get disheartened about it. It is quite normal. It is part of the process. And the reason we say it's a balance is it is about achieving the product that we want. And unfortunately, to achieve the product we want, sometimes we have to go backwards to go forward. Does that make sense? You kind of get a new consultant who's providing you with new advice, so you have to go backwards and then you will go forward again. Okay, we're going to speak about two key aspects of the building process. One, we're going to speak about labour, aka the trades which you're going to have, and also the materials. And they're two important parts of really achieving the outcome that you want. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about is trades and builders. And there's two parts to this, but the first one is, and it's a question we get asked more than any other, which is, how do you find trades? How do you know that they're right for you during the building process? And you'll have to do this no matter how much of the building work you get involved in. If you do an owner builder, you'll be doing this kind of constantly every day, because you will be managing the site. So you will be getting kind of people in to do smaller items. But even if you went out to a volume home builder, you will still have to do this in some capacity, just to make sure that people are really going to produce the outcome that you want. Okay, so firstly, I would look at making sure that any professional that you have on site has a license and has insurance. There is sites you can go to that you can see basically the licensing of that professional. If you are unsure what license that professional needs, I would call your building authority just to check. You can also call the municipal building inspector. They're often a good source of information, but check license and insurance. It's really important that they have those. However, it doesn't mean they're going to do a good job, unfortunately. But at least they'll be qualified, okay, if something goes wrong, or insured if something goes wrong. In terms of assessing experience and expertise of a tradesperson, you can look at previous examples, for example, or you can just do an interview with them, just see, are they speaking in a knowledgeable way. This is one that I normally use quite a lot, which is references. And as you might hear from my voice, I'm not a native Australian. I was born in the UK, and I have used references really to get most of my trades since I've been in Australia. I've been here a decade now, but I still use references a lot. And I think it's one of the best ways to get trades, with a caveat to that, which is it's important to ensure that the people who recommend that person to you share your values. So if you're asking somebody for a reference, And this is again why it's so important to know your values up front. If your value is, I want to build a sustainable house, then I wouldn't necessarily go to a developer who's building 20 tiny townhouses on a 300 square meter block. That's not who I would ask for a reference. So yeah, just try and find people who meet your kind of your standards isn't probably the word, but meet your value system. Communication skills. Some people have great communication skills, some not so. But you've got to decide the level of the communication that you want. Okay, so I've had it quite a few times where people have said to me, well, I've called this builder 8 times and for a quote, and they just haven't come back to me. And look, it's probably going to be a bad sign. And I would probably say in that case, I would move on to the next person, even if you've had a glowing reference. It's obviously not the right time for them, or their communication skills just aren't up to what you want to do. So look, I would look during that initial discussion, during the emails, just to make sure that their communication skills are aligning with yours. I would also ask when I'm getting a reference from a person, ask them, okay, the communication, how was it? Did they provide you with enough information? Yeah. Just something else with qualifying trades and builders is around their pricing structure. Pricing structures can vary a lot. When I talk about a pricing structure, I mean how they want their payment. So often you will find with trades that they ask for a deposit or payment up front, and then they'll give you a breakdown of when the next payments will be required. I am very wary of paying a deposit up front unless I know it's for a particular reason. And I would encourage you to also be quite reticent about paying any money before work has been completed. Be cautious in this one. I know not many, but a few people who have paid money up front and never got a service. Saying that, I do it sometimes. I don't do a lot. I usually just do it for materials, if any materials are needed up front. I would only do that to a person I trusted. Sometimes I have said, look, I will pay you the day you turn up on site. And also I'd be reticent about payment structures where you are paying more than the work that has been completed, if that makes sense. So if they're asking for 70% on day one and then 30% when the job is complete, that would worry me, because really they should be paying, if the payments are staged for a reason, because it is a staged process. So the stages has to reflect the actual building work which has been completed. Also, a big one for me is site visits and inspections. So builders do differ on how often you're allowed to attend sites. Some builders are pretty okay with it. They're like, no, just give us a call, we'll come down, we'll meet you on site. Usually they won't allow you to go to site by yourself, or certainly not onto the site, because of course health and safety, it is a construction zone. But some builders can be, no, we're going to arrange a time, you can only go on so many times during your build, or very much allocated visits. Again, there's not a right way or a wrong way to do that, but just be aware it is a thing. And I have had some people who have said, like, oh, well, I can only go to a site once every 3 months to and we do a site tour. And I would have liked to have been a bit more involved than that. And that's fine. It's just be aware of it and speak to them about what their way of working is. See if they've got a kind of explanation for that. And then also tell them what you would like and see whether that would fit. Contracts and agreements. Contracts and agreements are important for both parties to realise the relationship. Some are more formal than others. I tend towards a formal arrangement, and I would probably encourage you to do a formal arrangement as well, just for protection. But it's just about having those agreements so that they are professional and provided in a timely way. And those, if they're for large amounts, they can, well, you can do it for any amount, but for large amounts, I would normally refer those on to a lawyer or solicitor just for review. Okay. But this is where we're going to talk about team alignment again, and team alignment is so important when it comes to building sustainable homes. Okay, so shared vision and clear goals. It's really about trying to find people who are going to work in your team which share your vision and are happy to work towards your goals, and they're going to be happier to work towards your goals if you share that vision. Okay, so if you are, I have a local builder here who builds green homes. If I wanted to build a green home, which I do, he is the natural port of call, and having a chat saying these things are important to me. I want that. If they are receptive to that, then I would progress with them. If they're not, I would say, do you know what, we're not the right fit. That's fine. We're going to move on. Effective communication is really important. Collaboration, coordinated efforts. So are we both pulling in the same direction? Finding somebody who can empower you. I think we've all spoken to builders who, and I say this particularly as a woman who's in the industry, I think we've all come across people who kind of talk down to you or try to bamboozle you with what, bamboozle is probably a bamboozling word, but they try to kind of like say these technical terms to you, which will just make you feel like you're out of your depth, and then you won't ask any questions. And like, that's not what we want at all. We want people who are going to basically make us feel empowered as a customer to achieve a product. Flexibility and adaptability of the process. Some people are, or some builders or tradespeople are very rigid in the way that they work. They work to what they do, and that's it. Now that's actually all right. I don't mind that sometimes, but you've just got to make sure that you will work with that product. Okay, and this often comes up when you're building a volume build. So if you go to one of the volume house builders, you are buying effectively an off-the-shelf product. How much can I customize and adapt that? Probably not a lot, but will it work for you? If it does work for you, then great. If not, then you might want a different part of the process or a different method to achieve that outcome. But flexibility and adaptability also kind of works on a kind of more micro level as well. If you have a builder and your cladding doesn't arrive, is your builder going to adapt to it? Look, it's sometimes difficult to assess that at the beginning of the relationship, but it might be good to assess during those initial conversations with the builder how I feel this person's going to be flexible, and is that going to meet what I need? Innovation is a big one, and you'll find that more the builders who work in more sustainable space are more innovative. They are more open to new products and new ideas. It is as we'll see in a minute, it is a changing field. There is new stuff coming in all the time. So finding somebody who is willing to innovate with you is important for sustainable builds, I would say. Just some others, accountability. So will they be accountable? Resilience is probably more for yourself during the building process and making sure you're resilient, but also positive impact and continuous learning. Just making sure that your kind of team, now you might not want all of these in your team. They might not all be important to you. It's really about taking the ones where you think, oh, okay, I want this in a person, but actually I don't mind if they're not that flexible, or I don't mind if they have a good level of communication, but they're not the best communicators, but I really, really want them to be innovative and use new products. It's finding that balance. Okay. We're just going to move over to materials, because materials, particularly in the sustainability space, have become a big part of it, because it's a fast changing environment, as I said. So I think it's become a bit of a skill to assess products and materials that claim to be sustainable and green, and assessing whether that is actually the case, and actually whether it's going to fit to your build. And I mean this, so there's a lot of products coming onto the market, okay, and it's very fast paced, but there is also a lot of greenwashing that goes on. And just some examples of greenwashing. So they say they're very green, but they use vague language around it. And the often one you see this with products as well, but I often see it with builders. So the builder wants more work, and they know that sustainability is a big deal. So they put a picture with loads of solar panels on their website, and they'll have a roof which has loads of solar panels on it. Well, just because you put solar panels on a roof does not mean you're a sustainable builder. Effectively, they're saying the right things, they're giving the right imagery, but actually it's just a tokenistic effort, really. There can be other things, so misleading or false data, green lighting. So there's a lot of greenwashing that goes on around products. It's a hard world, because I think everyone is kind of understanding that people want sustainability, and actually they're probably willing to pay a bit more for sustainable products, and so loads of people are kind of flooding into that space. Research early, and speak to experts about that. Your building designer, if they are somebody who meets your values and meets your sustainable values, they'll probably guide you through whether that's actually the case or not, and they'll probably be happy to investigate that product with you just to make sure it is kind of actually what it says it is. But an important part of assessing materials in terms of their sustainability is making holistic decisions. So we often choose materials. So we've got a beautiful picture here of some beautiful stone, but we often make decisions just on appearance. And I think a good example of that would be recently, where the quartz has been discontinued. It looks beautiful, but actually it was doing quite a lot of damage to the workers that were producing it, and it has been banned accordingly. So I think we can't just make decisions based on appearance. There needs to be the kind of more holistic decision-making process. So look, the old ones were appearance, cost, but longevity is a big factor with sustainability. You want to choose products which are fit for purpose, which will stand the test of time. You don't want to be replacing something in 2 or 3 or 5 years. There's other things like off-gassing. So off-gassing is where a product releases chemicals into the environment, and I'm a big one for this, particularly paint, but there are quite a few. So really ensuring that the product that you buy doesn't produce this kind of off-gassing effect. The other thing is the life cycle of the product. Can you buy something that won't be in a refuse center, won't be in a garbage center in 5 years' time? So for example, my sofa is from the 70s, proud of that. And I'm sure it's probably got another 30 years to go in it. And because of that, it's about buying products, installing products which are going to stand the test of time. They will be continued to use, and even if you use them, they might be able to have a new purpose in a new life once you've finished with them. Okay, just moving more on to sustainable building. We've actually touched on it, but we'll go over it a bit more. Just to, there's been a big change in the building industry this year. So back in 2022, there was a new national construction code that came in with some new, well, it had amendments to it, which means that all new homes across Australia have to be 7 stars, which is good news. 7-star ratings are not massively difficult to achieve anymore, but they do need some forethought. I think it includes solar. We'll actually do this in a second, so I probably shouldn't go over it. But I think they have to have solar as standard, dishing the gas, kind of orientation of the building has become really important, as has, of course, insulation. And also, but there's some cheap ways to do things, like ceiling fans are a good way of doing heating and cooling. Anyway, so all states and territories are adopting this at a different rate, but I think with New South Wales, it's just come in May, where all new homes have to be 7 stars. This does also apply to alterations and additions. So alterations over 50% of the existing square meterage, and additions over 25% also have to be brought up to the 7-star rating. This has made it quite look, some existing structures is difficult to retrofit to make them 7 stars. There is some leniency if you've tried and it just won't get up there. Speak to your building inspector about that. But it's made it more cost effective just to do a new build over alteration and addition in some cases. But simple things they will ask you to do with alterations. So they'll ask you to replace the windows for either double glazed or maybe even triple glazed in some cases. They'll ask you to do ceiling, floor and external wall insulation. In a 7-star, you won't be able to get gas. They'll ask you to add solar, and they'll ask for water recycling systems as well as standard. But if you're concerned about that, you need to speak to your building inspector about what they expect. So actually, just to move on to sustainable buildings as a kind of final thing today, which will take us over several slides, we're going to look at a particular case study. Okay, and this is a project the Build Her Collective did in Fairfield in Victoria, where they built 2 townhomes. But they were large they were built over kind of on 400 square meter blocks, so they were fairly big, or they had a big allotment for and they were 4 bedrooms. They were fairly sizable townhouses. And we'll look about how they incorporated and I've put sustainable renovation here. It wasn't. They were actually 2 new builds. So we'll just look at how they incorporated sustainable elements into this development. Now, the first one is to talk about the size of the builds. It is important to recognise that every square metre of building that you build is using natural materials. It has to be heated, it has to be cooled. So getting the size of a building right is really the number one in building sustainably, I would say. It has to meet your needs. There's no point just sort of living in tiny boxes. We have to build something that meets our family needs. But if you are, I think the days of building these kind of massive open spaces where it was cost a fortune to heat and cool with these double height voids and stuff like that. Look, you can still have them, but just I think they're moving out, and also I think they're only being used in limited capacity. I can remember going to see a house where it was just this massive room at the back, just this open plan living, and it had like a 4.5 meter ceiling at the back. And whilst it was beautiful, like the reality is it is space you have to heat and cool. And also just build, which is again in itself not necessarily the most sustainable practice. So getting the building, so it goes back to understanding the needs of your family, or just who's going, and then think, okay, how are we going to be using these spaces over the next, so what spaces do we need? Do we need a study at all? We probably do need a study. Do we need that study to be 12 square meters, or do we need it to be, we don't need it to be like 30 square meters, or can we just have something which is like 6 square meters? I don't know. Do we need 5 bedrooms, or can we get away with like 4, which is a multi-purpose space? That kind of thing. So building what you need, but making sure that it is good. The other thing you can do here is really place the furniture that you want, to make sure the furniture fits in quite nicely to the space. So if you have in your lounge, you know, you have a sofa and an armchair, kind of visually place that and say, okay, does that work? Okay, do I need more than that? No, that's fine. Okay, or can I get away with less than that? Just to make sure that the size of the build meets your expectations. Use of materials. Again, a big one on this project. This had a slab for thermal massing. It was also made of brick, again for that thermal mass. So what thermal massing does is it, if the sunlight hits it, it can heat up during the day, and then it can kind of slowly release that heat during the night, and kind of vice versa in the summer. It can kind of cool the place because it takes a while to heat up. Does that make sense? So it keeps it cool. So thermal massing was used in this. They also used, of course, double glazing. They did a lightweight frame, which is quite a sustainable way to build. It's kind of lightweight on the top to ensure that there weren't heavy materials used. Recycling wastage. So look, building sites produce a lot of waste. For example, in this build, I know they had some excess insulation, which is the insulation that goes into the slab, and you can recycle that on. Like, this could have just gone to landfill. There's no need. You can recycle it on. In fact, I think you can usually, in most circumstances, get people to pay money for it. But hey, look, if you're just making sure the product doesn't go into landfill, that is a sustainable approach. Using recycled materials where possible. I think often a good way to do this is in the garden, but you can do it internally as well. Certainly a lot of people go on Marketplace to find recycled materials. Just one second. So, but often in the garden, recycled pavers, recycled bricks, it works very well, and incorporating that into the product, into your house, is really important. Energy wastage. So this is really, so we are undertaking our first wrapped house. So this will be where we fully wrap the exterior shell in kind of paper, and then we will make sure there's no joints, so it'll be totally airtight, which will be amazing. But just making sure that there's no energy wastage, of course, through doors and seals and stuff like that. So this house was designed to exceed industry standards, and it had several features in it at the time, particularly around the solar and the battery storage, where they could increase the usage in the future. Does that make sense? So they were preparing for the future with their design. Like most houses now, this was an all-electric build. That meant having 3-phase electrical, but that was well worth it. Water retention. Now, water retention on site is something that councils are quite big about nowadays. So it's kind of making sure you have a water tank for stormwater. But also it can be stuff like using grey water within your build. So you would have often the grey water will go to your toilets, or it can in some cases go to your like laundry system. But it's about retaining that stormwater on your site for a period of time before some of it will go out to the main stormwater system. I should have said, of course, the big one there is, of course, going to all your plants in the garden, but I think that's an old-fashioned one. Now we're taking it towards the toilets and towards the laundry. As I said, orientation and the thermal mass is important. Passive ventilation. So this is again around orientation of a building to create breezes and like flow of breezes through a house, which means that you might not have to turn on the air conditioning. This house, I think you'll see up here, it had some high windows. Now you can't see it, but they were operable, and often high windows create this kind of chimney effect where it kind of draws nice breezes in, and then you can kind of, the hot air rises and it can escape through a high window. The other way to achieve passive ventilation is just making sure that you have windows on the kind of 2 sides of your house where the breeze flows from. So in Victoria, our southwesterly breezes are the cool ones. So we try to have like a window. Actually, southern glazing isn't a great one, but if you try to have a window or a portable window on this kind of southwest corner, and then it flows towards the north, then you can create some beautiful passive breezes that go through. Okay, as a final thing, because I know we've got some questions and I don't want to keep you too much, but as a final thing today, we're just going to do an example just to show you about how sustainable prices can work in the long run. And this is an actual example from this Rathmines project. And it was a lived example where they worked through the real costs of installing a gas hot water system versus a heat pump hot water system. Okay, so they first looked at gas. Now, I've used gas in the past many times. I was impressed by the initial cost. Gas is quite easy to install, so the installation costs are quite quick. If you actually ever bought a gas unit, they're more inexpensive. Some costs can vary on the complexity of the setup, but really you're going to find it's a fairly cost-effective option. Operating costs, they can fluctuate. Okay, so and I think we've all seen this over the last couple of years, massive fluctuations in the gas price. Efficiency, gas heating systems can have a good efficiency, especially if they are high efficiency condensing units. However, there is a huge environmental impact of the gas hot water system. So gas heating releases carbon dioxide, which contributes to greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. And I think there is a statistic which is 50% of all the natural gas used in Australia is used to heat Victorian homes, which is absolutely mind-boggling if you actually think about it. And so there must be a better way. So then they looked at heat pump systems, and look, this was built in 2000. Heat pumps weren't new, but they were a newer technology. Now they're quite commonplace. If you've had a heat pump, they are very normal, they're very efficient. They're a technology which is becoming, well, look, I mean, they're standardly installed now in new builds, so they've become very good at what they do. But in terms of initial costs of heat pumps, especially the very efficient ones, because they're a newer technology which is improving all the time, they have higher upfront costs and they have higher installation costs. The operating costs of heat pump systems are generally much lower, and because they work with heat pumps work off electricity. They're solely electric. So the electricity is more stable in terms of pricing, efficiency, time and life cycle costs on this type of system should be a benefit, which we'll see in a second. And in terms of the environmental impact, there are fewer direct emissions because it's an electric system, greater offset from the grid with renewable energy sources. So you can either get an energy efficient source to work your heat pump, or of course you could generate the heat pump electricity actually from solar on your build as well. And that works even better if you have a battery on site. So actually looking at the kind of real costings of that. So the heat pump per house was going to cost nearly $5,000 to install. They had the option to do an electric element boiler, which would still be an all electric system, but it was effectively just a big kettle. So it just had a filament in it, which kind of just heated up the water. But that's not the kind of new technology. It would have been half the price, but I think it wouldn't have worked so well, and it would have used up more electricity as an option. The gas connection was required, was $3,000, and also the gas heating system to install was $1,500. So, I mean, if you look at the gas heating system, it's $1,500 compared to $5,000. It's not a lot at all. Yes, there's a gas connection required because this was a new build. But if you were looking at a renovation or with already had gas, then your gas heating system is going to be quite an effective option. However, if you look, I sound very positive towards gas there. I'll turn it around. If you actually looked at the real numbers, so in terms of the heat pump, the peak tariff and high efficiency, it came out at $290 to run, and over 10 years would produce 4.2 greenhouse gas emissions in tons. The gas 5-star systems, the annual cost would be $575, and it would produce over double the greenhouse emissions. So, is there one more slide? So basically, going back and forward. So, so the upfront cost for a heat pump was $5,000, but per year it was looking at $290. And actually, I know the owners of this house, and I can tell you they did not have an electricity bill. I think it was for the summer with their solar on it, and they have a battery. So I'm pretty sure they haven't had a heat pump bill this year. Whereas gas upfront, $4,500 per year is costing you $575 to operate. The payback investment is 1.4 years. And even if you don't need to install the gas connection, it's still going to work its way through in only a number of years. So look, I think the moral of the story here is to do your homework on the product, speak to the experts about that, but also just to look at the real costing going forward. I think you get caught up in the building process, and the building process is expensive. So you might find during it you're trying to save money, but you've got to look at, we are going to live in this for the long term. How can I save money over the long term, not just during the building phase, and also create a sustainable product at the same time that is going to kind of help our children's generation. Okay. So just in conclusion, I'm just going to do a conclusion as to what I've said, and then I'll throw it open for questions afterwards. So look, I think the first thing to say is you need to be informed to make the right decisions for your family, but also for your team. Okay, so as I said at the start, the building process is like creating a family. You're creating like these different people who are doing different tasks for you. Okay, so if you can get informed, so you are steering the ship, but that information comes from understanding your values, it comes from understanding your drivers, it comes from knowing the building process, it comes from speaking to designers about what environmentally kind of sustainable features you are going to use during your build, getting informed so you can make those decisions going through the process. It's important to know that how much you invest in research and relationships will pay you back, not just during the build, creating kind of smooth relationships through the build, but also afterwards, because ultimately I think we all want to just we want to find a building which is one going to meet our family needs, going to meet the needs of kind of future technologies, going to meet the needs of kind of the world moving forward. And if you do your research into those, then you can create a beautiful product of your dreams. And with that, I am done, and I'm going to throw back to the lovely Barbara, who will ask.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Petra. That's a lovely way to finish your presentation.
Okay,
Thanks for
thank you.
plenty of tips. I'm sure everyone's got their heads full of informations. We've got a few questions that have come up.
Okay.
So Alison's asked what's the difference when you were talking about the 7-star rating requirement for that new code? What's the difference between alterations and additions with regards to the 7-star rating requirement?
So alterations would be around altering in existing space. So if you had a home and you changed the walls, but you kept the existing structure, or change so I mentioned a cosmetic renovation at the start. This would be different to a cosmetic renovation. A cosmetic renovation is just paint, kind of might change the flooring, you might even change the kitchen, but an alteration is where you start moving about those walls internally. Okay, now for the new regulations is 50% as a guide. You might want to check that with a building surveyor, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. It is 50% would be considered a major alteration. Of course, an addition is actually adding on to the existing square space of a building. So you're taking the building, you're doing an add-on. And with those new regulations, you are allowed 25% increase. Before that kind of 7-star rating kicks in. There is also it gets a bit complicated, because you say you are altering and doing an addition. I think you can do like 25% alteration and then 25% addition. So just check that. But it is a big impact to the kind of renovation space, having to bring those spaces up to 7 stars.
Yes, okay, thank you. And does that mean, just to clarify, does that mean the extra bit, so the extra 25 or the extra 50% needs to be 7-star, or does that mean the rest of the building needs to be 7-star because you've added 50% or changed 50%?
Well, yeah, if you add on 25 over 25%, they are asking you to bring up the whole building to 7 stars.
Okay.
Now, just to warn you, not warn you, just to explain, there is some flexibility on that. I think there's some practicalities, like obviously we can't all change the window orientations of existing homes, and yeah, there's only so much we can do. So as long as you've kind of shown to your building inspector you've tried, sometimes you won't be able to achieve that 7 stars, and they can work that through with you.
Yeah, okay, great. That makes sense. We've got another question. What recommendations do you have for sustainable ceiling insulation material?
Oh yeah, so I don't know whether you're talking about insulation there. The first thing, again, speaking to that, would actually be the height. I know that's not what you asked for in terms of sustainable materials, but looking at the height of ceilings is actually really important to sustainable homes, because the larger the volume of the room that you're trying to heat, the more difficult it becomes. Having said that, though, I think it's very, as a designer, it's really quite useful if you can have kind of different height levels in a building. I think it produces kind of a sense of space, which is really beautiful. But I think most designers are now leaning to kind of making features out of those kind of tall ceilings, rather than having them everywhere. So they're really the showstopper pieces now, because there is a cost to them. They have to be heated and cooled. Sometimes it is good. I think I mentioned the fact that if you have operable windows which are high, they can kind of draw the hot air outwards. That's great. In terms of sustainable products for a roofing material, sorry, it was a ceiling material, wasn't it?
Ceiling insulation, yes.
Ceiling insulation. The best thing would be a thick one. It would be ensuring the fact that you can get quite a lot of insulation in between in that cavity space. Ceiling insulation, if you've ever seen it, is quite thick, and it's better if it is thick. It's not one of those ones that is good to compact. So ensuring that you have a good depth, and what I mean by good depth is 400 or 500 millimeters deep in that cavity, to ensure you can get a good insulation would be good. Of course, there are other things you can use. Well, obviously the one is plasterboard. There would be kind of other timber, which would be lovely. Yeah. And of course, the dark roof situation goes into that as well.
Great, thank you. And at the same time, every time you've mentioned something, Doug from Renew has been popping links into the chat, so everyone's got access to everything you're talking about, but they've got a link straight to an article. So he's just put some installation tips from your home, which is the great website that has resources about everything in terms of building, renovating, and he's put some examples of the insulation that could be sustainable to look into for
it's
people.
thicker than you think. You think like, oh, it's going to be, but if you could get quite a good depth to it,
Yeah.
And actually insulation doesn't work so well if you compact it. It actually needs to expand.
Great, thank you. And I'll send all those links in the follow-up email as well. So if you're watching and you're worried about remembering all those things, don't worry, I will pop everything in an email so you can click later. Another question, can you recommend an index where we can find out about green builders? That would be a dream.
That would be a dream.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't know about one. Maybe that's an opportunity to start one, really, because we as a network are finding that it's coming up more and more. Now, there is things you can go to. Obviously, the one is Passive House. If you look up passive house builders have to be regulated, or they have to have an accreditation to be a passive house builder. It's just whether you want to go down that route. It is a method of achieving sustainability, which is great. I know several people who've done passive houses, and they show me the temperature of their house all year round and their electricity bill, and it's quite amazing what they achieve in terms of creating a space which is doesn't fluctuate in temperature almost at all. It's amazing. But it's not the only way to achieve a sustainable build. Like, there are other ways you can do it without doing a passive house. But Having said that, there is a register of passive house builders if you'd like to go to that. It would be nice if the building authorities had a bit more information, almost like a speed dating service, about what was important to a builder.
Yeah, Doug just popped a couple of links for the Building Designers Association of Australia, and then the Green Building Council of Australia, and the Green Star Project Directory. So that might be a good starting point for anyone who wants to have a look. But it is, yeah, a minefield out there to go through. I had another question, which was, are there any financial incentives available for green building and renovating? And in terms of councils, I can mention that the Willoughby Council, so for anyone who's in a Willoughby Council local government area, we've got the solar bulk buy available for our residents. So that's if you want to install solar on your roof, we have built a partnership with a solar supplier that will offer our residents preferential prices, and we've reviewed all their products that they're offering. So I'll get Doug to post a link in the chat for that as well. The other councils that are part of tonight, a couple of sustainability rebates. So if you're doing renovations or, for example, installing a heat pump or solar, you can get rebates. So I know North Sydney residents have access to this, or Ku-ring-gai and Lane Cove as well. So I would suggest going on to your council website and just looking for sustainability rebates, and that will come up. In terms of national incentives,
I'm not so sure. I think it usually works on a state or kind of municipal kind of level, but mostly the ones that I see, so check out, are around solar and heat pump installation. So taking out, it is quite common for either state or local government to offer. So they'll take away your gas boiler and they'll put a heat pump in instead, and there's rebates for that. And there's quite a few companies that are doing that at the current time. There is also, usually we shall see some people who come around to seal up the gaps as well. So for example, I know there's one in Victoria, I don't know whether it's in New South Wales, but there's an incentive scheme that all of your fan extractor fans, they'll put in a kind of this paper which actually kind of creates a heat barrier for that. So look out for that, and that's a free service.
Yeah, I don't think that's available in New South Wales from what I know, but I could be wrong. There are definitely things like water. I know Sydney Water has the Water Fix program where they, for a very low cost, they'll come and check all your water.
Yes. Yeah.
Like for detect any leaks and do any repairs. And usually it's like a fraction of the cost of if you'd gone to see a plumber. So that's a good one for water efficiency if you're, redoing your bathrooms and
very
kitchen.
much so. And they're always changing. Just keep an eye out, really.
Yeah.
Always kind of something was changing.
Oh, thanks, Doug. He's also put that link.
Thank you, Doug.
Someone asked for Willoughby Council about the sustainability speed dating event when we used to have green architects. We haven't run that for a number of years, and it's not on the cards anytime soon. But saying that, we just need a demand. So at the end, when you fill in your feedback survey, if you want to mention that, it'd be great to bring them back. It's always good for us to have that, material to be able to plan future events. I know we were talking, we're in discussion about planning a passive house, maybe webinar for our residents as well. So we'll, if that happens, it'll be in the next 6 months or so. There was any other questions coming up? I don't know. Anything else has been answered? I did have a follow-up questions because you mentioned gas a lot. And you mentioned the heat pump versus gas heating, which made complete sense. Any other tips you can share on ditching gas in general in your house? You know, if you've got gas cooking, obviously hot
look.
water.
Yeah, gas cooking is the one that I find people struggle to give up the most, because a lot of people do like heating on gas. However, there are other options. Of course, there are induction is a great one. And look, unfortunately, you're going to have to give it up. You're going to have to find alternative solutions. I mean, the other one obviously is gas heating, which still would be prevalent in New South Wales. It's very prevalent here in Victoria, the gas heating, but of course you just can't get it. So I did an analysis. I'm going to do my home and renovate my home in the near future, and I looked at gas heating. I'm doing a renovation, and actually I don't have to come up to these 7 stars because it's already been designed and gone through council. But I decided just it wasn't worth the reconnection fee. Because it is quite substantial. So I was just going to reconnect it really for one item, and there was just no point to it. So it's one of those things where I think you've just got to get over the gas, really. In terms of fires, of course, I could have put in a natural, like a wood burner. I personally feel that that's, I mean, I love a wood burner, but it's still got some kind of emissions problems with that as well. I looked into other ones, there's ethanol burners, but the heat that comes out of them isn't ideal. So I've decided not to do any of those. And we'll just concentrate. In fact, where the fireplace is going to be, I'm going to have a lovely indoor plant box instead, which might be a great sustainable solution instead.
Yeah, good alternative. So did you end up getting split system air cons for heating and cooling as your alternative
Yes,
to
in
gas?
fact,
Yeah, okay.
I'm very much an exponent for the fact that you've got to heat the rooms where you need it. Does that make sense? I think that's a sustainable thing. There's no point heating or cooling a whole building anymore. You've really got to have quite a quick system to the rooms that you're in, and that's going to be the most sustainable. So yes, we're doing in bulkhead split systems, which we can use. And also I'm a big fan of fans as well for the heating and cooling. They are a very cost-effective solution, which provides kind of which provides kind of instant cooling, really. So I'm doing fans above beds, and in the office it can be a bit noisy, but they're very good. So yeah, that's the methods I'm using.
Great, thank you. I think that was all the questions, and it's almost 8 o'clock, so that's perfect timing.
Yep.
Thank you again for all this information, all those tips. I think everyone will have plenty of homework to do now. Or we did have maybe one last question. Sorry. Oh no. Sorry, no. Someone thanking you for the latest requirements and trends happening for building and renos.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned, I'll pop all those links in an email and send everyone a feedback survey so you can give us your feedback on tonight, and some ideas for the future are always very welcome. I'll also, as soon as the recording is ready, I'll send a recording of this one to everyone as well. But in the meantime, I'll send you the recording for the previous 3 webinars in case you want to watch them, because there's some great resources about sustainable building materials, rainwater tanks in our 3rd one. So definitely worth watching if you haven't already. And yeah, thank you again, everyone, for attending. It's great to see people in this, cold, dark evening, logging in online and taking the time to learn on how to be more sustainable. So thank you, and we'll see you soon for future workshops. Have a good night. Thanks, Petra. Thanks, Doug at Renew.